he would say that he but it's something that he believes to be possible. And that's kind of his position on things. You said, I've heard you say you. Why? Yeah, absolutely. Why did that happen? Partly because I think that it's very easy to compute ideas about resentment or hatred, and the ways that these kind of eat you up inside. Right? So not just that it's like a nasty thing to do to someone else, but it's a nasty thing to do to yourself. There are some lessons I find where you can really learn them cognitively, but either you need to find them out for yourself through kind of no matter how many times somebody has told you something, or, and I think this is one of the strange benefits of really, really good novels, is that because you get inside as much as possible the head of the protagonist or the characters, you can kind of feel the lesson in a way that you might have processed intellectually, but hasn't kind of want a better way of phrasing it, like sunk down to the bones. I don't know, again, it's very difficult to talk about this, it sounds really wooey, but I feel like most people kind of know roughly what I mean, right? We've all had moments where we've learned something cognitively, maybe from a psychology paper, and it's true, right? We know it's true, and we read it and we think, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that, right? That's in the noggin now, and it's never coming out, and then immediately you just revert back to your old behaviors. And I think something, for me, reading Dostoevsky, I like talking about Dostoevsky just because I think that despite the fact that I'm an agnostic and he's a die-hard Orthodox Christian, we have a lot to agree upon. I think one of the benefits of reading these Dostoevsky books, and indeed any novels that kind of really resonate with you, is that they allow you to, they kind of speak directly to your emotions in a way that just makes it much more likely to stick in. If I can kind of cognitively think, oh yeah, resentment is a self-destructive emotion that I should try and expunge really at all costs, which is a very difficult thing to do. I think we all end up feeling resentful sometimes.
Yep.
But nonetheless, it's very easy to think that. The idea of, I've spent sort of like 3 hours, Notes from Underground is pretty short, but, so I spent 5 hours with this guy who's just a bastard, just kind of a miserable prick. Is really no other word for it. It's just kind of, he delights in the misery of others and delights in his own misery, but it's not true delight. It's this self-destructive outlook on life. If I think about not becoming the underground man, that's much more likely to stick in my head. I think that, Notes from Underground is a book that I would really recommend to everyone because, again, it's very difficult to put into words, but you really come away from it thinking, oh wow, I may have known before that not caring about other people and only being out for yourself and trying to be an egoist and feeling all resentful at the world, thinking the world hates me and hating the world in return. I kind of cognitively knew all those things were bad things to do. But this kind of really hammers it home in a way that is truly emotionally unforgettable. Yeah, that's a lovely way to put it. It's interesting to me reading fiction. I am not able to get through old fiction as easily as I can get through new sci-fi. If you put a fucking Blake Crouch or a Max Barry or I'll eat that up. If you put some Dostoevsky in front of me, I'm gonna have to do this in 5-page bites. But anyway, my point being, getting lessons
the other way around for me
are a pretty difficult thing to do, and it's definitely the curse of the sort of ruminative thinker to assume that you can just top-down dictate your system. Like, this is compelling. I should pay attention to this. Pay attention to that. You're shouting at your own gut and system, saying, you will pay attention to this. And he goes, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then, as you say, you step out of the house and you forget it all. Whereas Alex had this really lovely idea, actually, which I think is related to this, with regards to a anti-atheist argument. The thing that's most real to humans is personification and narrative and story.
Yeah, exactly. As if I can just choose to believe in God.
And motivation and human psychology and relations.
Yep.
And that is what the world of atheism is telling everybody to let go of. The thing which to them is most real and most true and most easy to understand and most compelling. And instead, in its place, saying, be compelled by statistics and data and theory
it's all sterile and grey brown sludge, and there's no reason for it other than just raw data, and this is what the spreadsheet says. And I think kind of the fiction versus non-fiction is not necessarily too dissimilar to that. We all love the idea of being as compelled by Atomic Habits as we would be by reading Dostoevsky, but and this is you even see this. Why is it the case, apart from for I guess like explanatory depth, why is it the case that non-fiction books are filled with anecdotes and little portable stories? Well, because it's more engaging, but also that this will hammer the point home better than the statistics can.
Absolutely, I think that
Nah.
where the again it's different, right? Because narratives, especially fictional narratives, are on their face false. So, in some sense, this proposes a challenge to anyone reading them, right? Because you want to learn from them. I want to pick up a Dostoevsky book and learn from it, but I can't just take everything that
Reading
it
a
has
lie.
at face
I
value.
know I'm reading a lie.
You can write a story about anything. I could write a story about whatever I wanted. It wouldn't make it have any lessons in. So you've kind of got this weird two-part division in what you're doing, where like at one kind of critical side, you've got to think, well, this is a fiction book. I can't take everything it says as read. Like even its allegorical lessons, I can't just kind of take them on board because this is the product of one person's mind, and one person's mind is eminently fallible. On the other hand, just approaching the world in this incredibly analytic, I'm never going to put anything into any kind of narrative. I'm not going to talk to my emotions, if that makes sense. I'm not going to appeal to them at all. I'm just going to have propositions and relations between propositions. That's really hard to learn from, and also, again, learn from in this kind of emotional sense. I also think that I think that it's quite an empty feeling way to live. And I think that, part of the reason why we perhaps don't recognize this is actually we're very good at telling stories. Like if you give people some information, they'll almost immediately sort it into a story if they can. It's because, this is fantastic. There are loads of memory techniques and mnemonics that are just based on this idea. You tell a story. And again, to bring us back to Dostoevsky and even to tie in Nietzsche a little bit, I think one of the things that reading a novel by Dostoevsky does is it takes these lessons that you may or may not have heard before about kind of psychology and the kind of the human condition, if you want to call it that. And all of a sudden, you are emotionally engaged with it. In kind of, to use Nietzsche's terminology, it's not just appealing to your cognitive side. It's appealing to your kind of basic instincts, and they're a lot stronger. It's very hard to think yourself into motivation, into like real consistent motivation. But if you really feel like something's meaningful and worth getting, you kind of naturally end up following it. My kind of part towards this way of thinking is very strange. At university, I kind of basically just did logic, like kind of formal logic. So I did like the driest form of philosophy imaginable, where you just sit there and you've got a proposition. They're like, well, prove this. And you sit there, and after 45 minutes, you go, I give up, and you email the lecturer. But in theory, you sit there and you finish proving it. And I kind of, as I got a little bit older, I say older, I'm like 25. But as I kind of, as the rest of my brain, kind of grew into my mid-20s, I kind of thought, there is really a place for this kind of slightly nebulous, but nonetheless definitely there idea of taking a really great book from the past and using that to learn a lesson that independently is a good lesson, but that when it's presented in this narrative form really sinks in and all of a sudden you can enact it.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Propositions and relations between propositions is actually what Alex calls date night on a Friday, which
I'm recording with Alex tomorrow about the history of logic.
Oh
I'm very
yeah.
sorry to hear that. This sounds to me a little bit related to this sort of danger of hyperconsciousness, this sort of self-referential thinking. Well, how does that play a role? Again, we hinted here at the perils of the sort of ruminative, cerebral, preying at the cognitive horsepower alter thinker. What's the danger of hyperconsciousness?
So, again, this is a really prominent theme in Notes from Underground.
I don't think it's
one
the
of
problem, it's
the
just
things that the Underground Man
temperament.
is suffering from is what he calls
As long
the
as you
disease of
get the thing.
hyperconsciousness, which is effectively that he can't act naturally. And by naturally, I sort of mean he sort of lives his entire life ever so slightly outside his own perspective. It's as if he's moving through the world, kind of viewing himself from a third-person perspective, like a video camera. Like a video camera's following him around, and try as he might, he can't inhabit his own first-person perspective. He's like stuck in this third-person view. And again, I don't know, again, this sort of, one of the interesting things about reading Dostoevsky, it's very hard to then go away and kind of go, oh, well, there's all of this empirical literature on kind of n equals 2,000 people that verifies this, but I'm willing to bet that at least a fair proportion of people have had this happen to them, especially if they're of the more kind of ruminating type. Like, one of the reasons why Notre Dame Underground really appeals to me is because we have a lot of narratives, and we're told as kids, right, don't, think before you act. Don't just act. And I think that a fair amount of the population, myself included, really ran with that and went, right, I'm going to think, and I'm going to keep thinking until I'm really sure what I'm going to do. And I'm never going to, like, all of those kind of instincts and more kind of, I'm not,
Again, temperament.
Forget about those. Those are complete nonsense. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to calculate until I know exactly what's going to happen.
Yep.
And one of the things that, or one of the kind of sub-arguments, I suppose, if you like, of Notre Dame Underground, is that Dostoevsky is attempting to illustrate this is simply not how you can live your life in any kind of compelling fashion. He's not, saying you need to act without thinking at all. He's more trying to indicate that the needs that a person has can't simply be satisfied by cognition. And he's largely responding to other thinkers at the time who are kind of proposing a theory of human fulfillment called rational egoism, which is where kind of you organize society around people rationally pursuing their own ends and everything turns out fine. And Dostoevsky's point is that no, like, if people aren't rational enough for that. And moreover, like, they'd be miserable if they tried to be.
There's a line in Hamlet, thus conscience does make cowards of us all. This sort of idea that self-awareness is paralyzing. And it seems unbelievably linked here.
Yes, and again, it's one of those things where, like, I can't appeal to, like, airtight scientific evidence that this is a widespread phenomenon. I can only appeal to your own experiences. But this is, again, one of the really nice things about reading a kind of psychological novelist like Dostoevsky, or like another example is the French thinker Stendhal.
Yes.
When you're reading a very, very broad study, like studying 2,000 people, by necessity, any conclusion that study comes to is probably going to apply to you. It also probably isn't going to be as detailed as you might like. Just because, this isn't a fault. This is exactly what you want out of a generalizable conclusion, right? You want something that applies to everyone, but humans are very, very different to one another. And so, one of the things that I think that psychological novels, and also, there used to be journals that published therapists' case notes, and they don't really exist anymore. They were fantastic for this kind of thing. Where, if you pick up, you get a very, very in-depth view of one person's perspective on the world, which might be completely useless. But it might, if that person's similar to you, that is like fucking gold. If they're facing the same problem as you, that's amazing. Because it's really, really detailed. You run through this novel and you think, oh my god, I'm exactly like this person. Their life's a mess. So is mine. Now how am I gonna deal with this? And to a certain extent, you get a lot more detail out of this. You just then have to make sure that your critical lens is also fitted, so that you don't read novels and then go, right, everything in this novel is by necessity.
Sure, I'm gonna go kill a woman. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's
Just to
such a
see
good
what
point.
happens.
The fact that by design, representative samples are important in order to be able to do studies. And because of that, you end up curbing off, you shave off outliers, because outliers get regressed back to the mean by there being a sufficiently big sample size that's representative enough. But given that even the average of average person, the most average person on the planet, is going to have some idiosyncrasies that are abnormal or non-typical or quirky or different. You actually do need to find for them, okay, what is the person that's like you's thoughts about this thing and what did they learn? And that kind of requires you to either, I guess, do purposefully unrepresentative samples.
Good luck trying to get funding for that.
Yeah, or, as you say, targeting individuals' experiences and going very deep.
Yeah, I think a good analogy of this is, I'm like, I go to the gym as a kind of hobby, but the gym that happens to be nearest to me is like a really intense gym. And so it's got lots of like powerlifters in there who do competitions, lots of bodybuilders in there who compete. And, you know, they're all pretty friendly, so I go up and natter to them while they're trying to get on with things. And one of the things I ask them about is their training program. And something that you immediately find, I'm sure, you know, you're very into the gym, so I'm sure that you've kind of find this as well, is that they're all very different. Because they all get to know themselves in such an in-depth level that all of the kind of, that everything that applies to the average person no longer applies to them, or they can see themselves in such a higher resolution that they will take some of that on board, but also disregard other bits because they just know it doesn't work for them. Think about, you know, like, was it Dorian Yates did like 4 sets for chest every 2 weeks or something like that? You know, you think that's 99.9% of people that's not going to work for. It's not a representative kind of training plan, but it really works for him.
What do you think? Could it be the case that existentialism is just intellectualized depression with better PR?
Oh yeah, certainly in some cases. Like, I think that, again, you can certainly, especially when you learn about some of these people's lives, you can really see how their personal struggles bleed through into their philosophies. I think that, again, it's a very controversial thing for me to say, but for me, the value in reading, say, Nietzsche isn't necessarily because I think that his view on the world is all that correct. I think it's because, you know, for me, I also have a chronic pain condition. So when I read Nietzsche, I read someone who is kind of going through a similar thing that I do. Like, I'm in pain for like pretty much all my waking hours. And so seeing him kind of how he copes with that and the philosophy that emerged from that is very, very insightful for my own experiences as well. But like, say your point about depression, you know, you really see this in the philosophy of someone like Camus, where a lot of his early novels, like The Stranger is kind of the novel that he's most known for, is sort of about a really depressed person or somebody that really struggles to connect with reality or other people in any way. And sort of everything seems the same to them. And this has a philosophical aspect for Camus. But additionally, if you also feel similarly disconnected from life and you struggle to relate to people and all that kind of thing, then that can be far more valuable for you than it would be for your average person. You know, this is, I think that to a certain extent, a lot of existential philosophy is philosophers taking their own problems and really attempting to dig into them. And sometimes they hit upon something that's really generalizable. Quite often they don't. I think that one of the valuable things about reading them is that if they happen to have a similar problem that you have, then that's so valuable. So, you know, take this kind of, again, take the chronic pain thing. That kind of idea of like, I've got to find something, you know, I'm suffering already, I've got pain, and there's nothing I can do about it. I need to find some way to celebrate it. It's like, that's kind of the appeal of aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy for me.
Why didn't Camus consider himself an existentialist?
So, partly because he fell out with all of the existentialists, but also because he has a slightly different philosophical approach. So, existentialism, to kind of really boil it down as much as humanly possible, a lot of the existentialist solutions to nihilism or a sense of felt meaninglessness is authenticity in some way. And by authenticity, they don't exactly mean what your average person would mean by authenticity. They mean, in Sartre's case, like a recognition of your radical freedom. So Sartre, one of the things Sartre thinks that people do is act in bad faith. And for him, bad faith isn't like, you know, approaching an argument, wanting to show the other person to be a fool or something like that.
No.
It's when we go around the world denying our own free will. So he uses the example of a waiter who, when they're doing that, don't think of themselves as a person who's chosen to wait. They think of themselves as like a waiter and nothing more than that. They kind of reduce themselves to their social role. And then, you know, so Sartre's approach is very authenticity focused. Camus is a little different. So whereas existentialism is about restoring, kind of creating meaning, a sense of, you know, if I was going to boil it down, it's like creating meaning, re-imbuing the world with meaning. Camus sort of wants to know if he can continue to live without appealing to meaning at all. He just has this phrase, you know, can I live without appeal? And that's kind of the insight out of which absurdism is born. So Camus is very against the idea of retreating into meaning in any sense. He kind of wants you to keep the meaninglessness of life right at the front of your head and see if you can maintain the contradiction between you wanting meaning in some sense and there not being any meaning
yes,
there,
yes,
and somehow still continue to live and in some sense enjoy life. And a lot of people have pointed out that Camus suffered from really quite severe bouts of depression, and maybe this was a causative factor in the particular way that he has constructed this philosophy.
Everything
Again,
is.
it's like, I think that while I think that a lot of these thinkers may have conceived of themselves as creating a semi-universal solution to nihilism and problems of meaninglessness, I think that today, certainly the way that I see them, is that they're very, very in-depth solutions to similar problems that the authors happen to have.
So, okay, how is... Wait, actually, just when it comes to Camus, sort of the story of Sisyphus seems very relevant to absurdism. What is the lesson to take away from that?
Yeah, so the myth of Sisyphus in Camus' writing is meant to symbolize this kind of, it's meant to stand in for us all. So in Camus' perspective, we are trudging along a basically cyclical existence in the sense that there is nothing that we're doing anything for. We're not ending up, we're not obeying the will of God or the will of the universe. We are just trundling along in a kind of uncaring, unfeeling vacuum. And he compares this to the Greek king Sisyphus, who is his punishment for his attempts to escape death is damned to Hades, where he has to roll a boulder up a hill and then watch it go all the way back down again, and then start at the bottom and roll it all the way back up, and just do that for eternity. It's an existence that completely, to take us back to our stuff about narrative earlier. If narratives are almost inherently meaning-inducing, they have a resolution, and that's lovely. This is a structure of life that completely defies narrative resolution. It is like intensely, if you imagine doing that, it's like the most meaningless existence you can possibly think of. And on top of that, it probably really bloody hurts. So Camus, in his phrase, "we must imagine Sisyphus happy," is sort of, that's kind of, again, it's like the absurdist project in a nutshell, is can you maintain this view of life whereby you are kind of analogous to Sisyphus, and nonetheless enjoy it and embrace it and be happy? And it's kind of an open question whether you can. Like, I think that a lot of people will read, Camus and Nietzsche, or even, Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky happens to chime with a lot of things that I think bring my life meaning. So, loving others, that seems like that's very naturally meaning-inducing to me. A lot of people, I think, read these thinkers and sort of go, oh yeah, that's great. But actually, it is an open question whether any of this works. Like, you're allowed to say, I take your point, Camus, but frankly, I don't think I can imagine Sisyphus happy. I don't think anyone else can either. So,
Why was he concerned about trying to do that? What was he trying to solve for? What was the end goal he was trying to achieve?
So the stated end goal of the myth of Sisyphus is that he wants to know whether he should kill himself, or whether anyone should kill themselves.
Yep.
Given that, in his view, life is completely meaningless. And his end result is, no, you shouldn't, because in some sense you can learn to be happy despite yourself being analogous to Sisyphus. So that's the problem he's attempting to solve. At least as he puts it, is the problem of suicide. You might instead call it the problem of meaninglessness or something like that. Or the problem of how can you literally feel and think that your life has no meaning, and yet still continue to live and potentially continue to enjoy life in some sense. And I kind of think that how compelling you find that overall narrative is going to depend on how much the sting of the world potentially having no meaning really hits you. And I think that's going to depend that's going to hit you differently at different points of your life. I think for a lot of people, that they aren't just very happy to say, yeah, the world's meaningless, man. That doesn't bother me in any sense. And I'm kind of not quite.
It bothered Dostoevsky.
But for a lot of people, it doesn't. That's fine. I kind of think that, and I also think that it's Camus talks about this moment where you kind of realize that life's meaningless, and he doesn't describe it as a cognitive event. Again, to tie back to our point earlier, he's basically describing this as one foot in cognition, one foot in emotion. You recognize that life is meaningless, but also suddenly you feel it. And I think that, again, to bring this kind of down to earth, I think that something like a midlife crisis or a quarter life crisis is a really good example of this. Like thinking about, I remember before I kind of started the channel, I was just kind of sitting around being like, wow, like I think that I feel like life is meaningless. Like it's very kind of, we got this kind of life to live and you have no idea what to do with it. You don't even know how you're going to prioritize. Like I don't have an idea of what I even want to do. And I feel like, that more commonly hits people. A kind of midlife crisis is, I think, potentially a more widespread example of that, where, somebody gets to like, well, actually, one of my friends had a midlife crisis, and he described it as like he got to like 55, and he was like, oh my god, like I'm actually going to die at some point, and I feel like my entire life has been for nothing. And I can't intellectualize someone into that experience. Like I don't think that I felt it nearly as much as my friend did. But he was seriously in a dark place, kind of staring down the barrel of ending his own life, on the basis of this realization. And I imagine for a lot of people it just never happens, and that's like great. Like I don't think there's any reason to like induce it. But I kind of think about my friend a lot with this sort of thing. Where it's like it's very easy, especially because now, I have a lot of like, I kind of enjoy life. I'm kind of a natural optimist, so I kind of find it quite easy to kind of bumble along in a kind of sort of generally like quite happy state. But
it's not about that in particular.
Look at something like Camus writes and says, he's talking about how the realization that life is meaningless is going to bring immense suffering, and it's going to make you question whether it's worth carrying on. I kind of think, will it? And then I remember my friend and think, I just don't think I felt it yet.
Well, I wonder how much of this kind of goes back to what you were saying before. So much of the work of philosophy, or even YouTube channels did, everything is a thinly veiled autobiography, as far as I can see.
Yep.
That's a very Nietzschean idea.
That's what I say, everything is a self-portrait.
The philosophers were just basically writing their own autobiography.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, it certainly seems to be
nothing
the case
but
here,
self-portrait.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it really applies to existential philosophy. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons, I think one of the reasons why it's very easy, although existential philosophy pulls people in, it's also very easy to pick up a couple of books of existential philosophy and basically go, this is like bollocks. But I think that a lot of the time that feeling of this is like bollocks basically happens if you pick up a thinker who is just psychologically wired very differently to you. Like I sometimes have that with like someone like, I occasionally pick up Sartre, and I don't know, I just can't like, there's something about it that just doesn't particularly resonate with me. I can't quite get inside the head of the problem.
How would you advise then, or how would Camus advise somebody who is torn between the life is like excruciatingly meaningful and life is excruciatingly meaningless? How do they sort of, laughing my ass off, how do they thread the boat through the middle of that?
As in the idea of somebody like alternating between, sometimes they feel like life's incredibly meaningful.
Have you seen the image that I'm talking about? Do you know this?
Is this the thing on the tray?
No. So this is one of my favorite images. I'll get Dean to put it up for the people that are watching. So it's a tiny little boat.
Oh, let me show you
I'll
all.
put it in the chat, so you should be able to.
This is what it shows.
It's a tiny little
Oh,
boat,
fuck, sorry.
illustrated going along the water in between a whirlpool. And on the left it says life is devastatingly meaningless. And on the right is a 6-headed dragon. And it says life is excruciatingly meaningful. And there's this tiny little sort of Greek-looking boat with oars coming out the side of it, and it just goes LMAO.
Okay.
And
The excruciating part is the overlap.
right.
Kind of. I think that's like I think that's Scylla and Charybdis.
Right.
Kind of. I actually think that the kind of an underexplored area in existential philosophy, which I think Camus touched upon a little bit, but I think is like, if somebody wants to go out and write like the next tracks of existential philosophy, I'd love for it to be on this, would be that idea of excruciating meaning. Because
Yes.
it's very easy, I think, to romanticize the idea of a meaningful life. But it's totally possible for things to be like far too meaningful for comfort.
That's absolutely true. I don't know who to scream at
In the
that.
context of politics, which I think is fascinating. So he after he finishes the myth of Sisyphus, he sort of has this kind of like indifference about it. He's like, right, okay, so all the experience is roughly the same. There's no objective meaning. I'm somehow managing to muddle along, despite that. But in theory, this should make me indifferent to all of the bad things that are happening around me. Camus basically finds he can't do that. And he has this book called The Rebel, which is by far his most impenetrable work. But it is generally very, very interesting. And one of the points he makes in The Rebel is that at a societal level, it is perfectly possible to become too imbued with meaning. If you think about any kind of sort of theocratic tyranny, or like the terror of the French Revolution, or Camus' example is sort of Stalin's USSR.
Yeah.
His analysis of this is that the issue is at least partly that if you have an ultimate meaning that you're willing to literally sacrifice everything else to, then you will sacrifice as many lives as humanly possible, or as you think is required to fulfill this vision. What I think, it occurred to me that this observation definitely works, not quite in the same kind of apocalyptic sense, but works at some sense on the individual level, in that, I think that the sense of life being too meaningful is very, very natural. It's the sense of being under too much pressure. This idea of like, everything that's happening to me counts an awful lot. What am I going to do? Is, I think, a perfect example of somebody feeling too meaningful. But again, I think that means that, it's a pretty insightful meme, actually. I'm going to spend a long time on, because I think that what a lot of people want is not an abundance of meaning, nor
just
a complete
enough
lack of meaning, but enough meaning to give them a general direction, but also enough meaninglessness that you can make arbitrary choices along that way. You don't actually want every one of your decisions. I would argue, at least. I think most people don't actually want all of their decisions to be dictated by a kind of set of values in advance. And I also think that that's kind of, I don't know, that's sort of vaguely robotic. And also,
Aristotle mean.
I think that kind of approach doesn't do justice to just how difficult some decisions are. I think that certain moral dilemmas, you kind of, imagine that you spoke to someone. Sartre has an idea of like an insoluble moral dilemma, and his example is that somebody's torn between staying home and looking after their elderly mother, or going to fight the Nazis in the French Resistance. And I know his mum could really suffer from this. She could even pass away while he's gone. And at the moment, it's uncertain whether the French resistance will be victorious at all. And Sartre's point is that this seems pretty indeterminate. And, I don't know if somebody's value system was so well organized that they could give me like an instant answer to that dilemma. I don't know if I'd like that. I think that would be like, I think that, there's a sense in which their choices will be so determined that, I don't know if it will do justice to how excruciating real moral dilemmas and real just decisional dilemmas are.
I wonder how much of this is a challenge of communication, that it sounds so flimsy to sort of talk about emotion and desire and being pulled in different ways and gut instinct and this ephemeral, like flaky sense of some. But it's show me, let me grab a hold of it, put it into language that is testable. Does this make sense? This sort of desire to communicate things in a much more concrete, verifiable way.
And I do think that's a pretty good instinct, because at the same time, I do think that philosophical discussions can quickly go into territory that is, so abstract that I don't think anyone could plausibly give a shit. But, I think that one of the ways to sort of keep this down to earth is to link things like meaning back down into things like motivation and action and affect. So I think that, when somebody says, what's the meaning of life? There's a reason why that question can strike us as really like pointless. Like, what's the meaning of life? Like, how do we even go about parsing that? And I think that instead of asking questions like what's the meaning of life, I find that people are often a lot more enthusiastic if you phrase an existential question just in terms of what gets you up in the morning. What actually is the kind of motivating force behind your action? What if you removed it, would you then struggle to do anything? Like, and I think that this allows people to get a grip on what they find meaningful, which is quite a useful thing to learn. you know, if you find out that actually, like, I would really not know what to do without my group of friends, that might tell you you might want to invest more of your time and effort into that area of life. So it's getting kind of quite a way away from these particular existential philosophers, but I think that's one of the values in asking existential questions is that it does force you to confront what matters to you, and I think that it's very easy to forget what matters to you. I mean, you know, to tie this back to fiction, I know that a book that you like is The Alchemist, and I feel like a lot of, you know, the same kind of lesson occurs there, right? This kind of idea of like, it's very easy to forget the kind of things that are intuitively and instinctively meaningful. I think that one of the real flaws, I think, in approaching questions of meaning in the way that I do, which is to go away and read lots of existential philosophers and see what they think,
Yep.
is that there's a tendency that you can just become really ruminative about it. And, you know, occasionally I get a comment under one of my videos that's like, you're just overthinking it. And sometimes, if I'm in the right mood, I look at it and I'm like, you're probably right. You know, there is a sense in which you can get so...
No, but that's
so,
fun.
Deep into what this person's particular interpretation of Nietzsche is, or this person's particular interpretation of Camus.
That's my idea of fun. That is my
I
meaning
find
of
that
life.
stuff naturally interesting. But there is a sense in which, for the way that just you would want to approach an existential question, if you don't necessarily want to go in and read a bunch of this stuff, is that it's I think that part of it is recognizing that meaning is at least partly extra cognitive. It may involve cognition, but it's not merely cognition.
It's all vibes, man. Just comes
Well,
down
I think
to
that, you know, I think that vibes are really important. Like
do not undervalue the vibes.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so. You know, think about like what you come away with from a social set, like a kind of hang out with friends, or hang out with someone. You know, you might not remember exactly what was said, but you remember the vibe. I think that, you know, that we kind of again, I don't want to get kind of too wooey, but I feel like we are far beyond that point. I think that something that one of the valuable insights in Nietzsche's kind of prioritizing of the instinct, or kind of Dostoevsky's novelistic approach to existential questions, is that they are both essentially saying, you know, this isn't merely a cognitive issue. This is something that you also need to feel and enact. And, you know, they disagree on a lot, but I think it's nice when they agree on something.
Yeah, this sort of balance between what the cerebral ruminative thinker loves, which is to ask the why question,
Yeah.
and the realization that there is such a thing as too much reflection. There is a golden mean for fucking everything,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
And
Aristotle.
rumination is one of them. I'm kind of obsessed by this idea at the moment that advice which is made and works for most people will be widely distributed, because on average it's effective, it's an effective meme, and it'll continue to spread. But the problem is, because it's so popular, it's got such a bull run behind it, that even people who that advice is not for, who already have too much of the thing that it's pushing them to do more of, are tempted to take it on because it works so well for everybody else. So one of the good examples here is something like just work harder.
Yep.
Now, just working harder will reliably give everybody, almost everybody on the planet will benefit from that. There are very few scenarios that I can think of where working harder is not going to make the outcomes better.
Yep.
But there is a particular cohort of people for whom working harder is something they already do too much of, and what they actually need is a good rest ethic rather than a good work ethic.
And so think that... Oh, sorry, go on.
No. Just that the same thing comes for reflection and rumination. There are many people... Think before you act. Young Joseph, think before you act. It's very important. I must think before I act. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Dad. There you go. If you are a perennial thinker, maybe think a bit less. Maybe follow your gut. But the problem is, thinking before you act, even for the overthinker, is likely to give them, from an objective metric sense, better outcomes in life. They're going to be more careful, they're going to be more considered, they're going to make fewer failures. But what is it that they've lost? All of the losses here are hidden, and all of the successes tend to be pretty observable. So the losses of time, of the quality of peace, of the inner texture of your mind, of lost opportunity because it took you so long to be able to arrive at this particular thing. And the same thing for hard work. Well, how much are you tearing yourself up? What about the state of your health? What about your blood pressure? What about how much time you spent thinking about this thing and obsessing when you should have just been eating a sandwich or playing with your friends or doing whatever? Well, objectively, it's made you more successful. But again, I think this is why widespread rough-hewn advice should always go through a filter. And it's also why I find the criticisms that kind of treat audience members, you know, the podcast election with Rogan last year, it is so fucking patronizing to say, look at these agentic, unwashed peons watching this man just shovel like radical dogma down their throat. They voted exclusively because of what he said. It's okay, right? So you're saying that these people have no ability to discern anything that they see, and there's no filter between what they watch on YouTube on Joe Rogan's channel.
No, but that could
this
be
advice
said
that
about
David
the
Goggins said to
average
work harder,
advice
or,
too.
the fucking
You have to
Candace thing,
discern.
or whatever. Like, there is no degree of filter. And in the same sentence, I know that if the advice is sufficiently seductive and if it's sufficiently popular, that people do tend to imbibe that. So there's like a big tension going on there. But yeah, I'm pretty obsessed with this idea. Popular advice gets taken on unquestioningly, and for some people, they already have too much of it, so they probably need less.
Absolutely. I think the other side to that is a lot of popular advice just kind of generally is going to be maximized towards sort of minimizing social harm. So actually the thing that reminded me of this was a clip by David Mitchell on Would I Lie to You? And he sort of says, you know, children, broadly speaking, are divided into reckless children and timorous children. And he sort of says, you know, in order to keep the reckless children from jumping off of things and killing themselves by virtue of their, you know, untethered love for life, you need to tell all children, stop what you're doing, you know, think and slow down and be more afraid. And if you're already naturally fearful, as David Mitchell was, this is terrible advice and is actually going to harm you. But because the harm is significantly more hidden, as you say, it's less likely to end up on the news and have more guardrails.
Oh, that's so
Yes,
good.
yes,
You
yes.
explained what I was explaining much more succinctly than I managed to do it.
No.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I think that but I'd say to take your point about popular advice, I think again, you know, one of the benefits of reading novels is, you kind of laser in on, if you really relate to a particular novel, then you laser in on advice that is almost tailor-made for you, and lessons that are almost tailor-made for you, you know. And you know, I go on about Dostoevsky all the time because that's a novelist that I really like and who really resonates with me.
And
Because
all of
a
his
lot
characters has sufficient
a lot of
depth.
the, you know, he resonates with me far more than someone like Nietzsche, for example, because a lot of Dostoevsky's advice or kind of lessons for living meaningfully are to do with this notion that he has of active love. You know, he's very religious, but the way in which this religiosity often manifests in his work is through the idea that of loving others. But he's pretty kind of clear that loving others is going to be really hard work. He has this like wonderful kind of offhand, brilliant insight from a doctor in the Brothers Karamazov, where the doctor says, you know, it's very easy to love mankind in general, and it's very hard to love people in particular.
Yep.
I think that's brilliant. That's amazing. Like, that's so true. And I think, the Dostoevsky kind of outlining that active love is going to make your life incredibly meaningful, but also is going to be really, really, really tough. Is, you know, that's an approach to life that very much resonates with me. That's why I kind of go on about Dostoevsky all the time. I find that all of the stuff that Dostoevsky criticizes people for are applicable to me, and I find that all of his lessons are also applicable to me. So that's kind of, but my point is that other people might find authors or philosophers or anyone really who really resonates with them. You know, I think that we kind of, again, we have a tendency, and I have this tendency as well, you know, recovering logic students and all that, to only ever take on lessons that are universalizable. And the trouble is that kind of, if you're talking about the mean earlier, the kind of level of standard deviation of human property is just absolutely massive. So you know, you go for me, there's a good chance you might end up severely down the wrong path, especially in the kind of details, kind of novel stuff I'm coming. I'm still, you know, I feel like I sound like I'm really down on empirical. But I also think that, you know, I'm gonna try to make the case for the psychological novel, which is that you absolutely won't learn anything about humankind, but you might learn something about a few people, and one of them might be you.
Oh, dude, that is so good. Hey, man, let's bring this one home. I love your work. I love your channel. Everyone should go and subscribe. Where should people go? They're going to want to keep up to date with the stuff you're doing.
Oh, yeah, I suppose I'm unsolicited advice on YouTube. I may change the name at some point. That was kind of a name that I basically put on to acknowledge the fact that nobody asked me to do this. As a result, everything I do is deeply...
Well, I'm very pro using your own name. If you ask Alex when you see him tomorrow, ask Alex for the war zone that he made me crawl through in order to convince him to change his channel name from Cosmic Skeptic. Well, just get him to explain to you, because he could make me breakfast for the next 6 months and still owe me every single day. He could make me breakfast. I'm so bullish on you making a change. Make it your name, dude. Capture that fucking personal accountability. But everyone should go and watch it. You've got great breakdowns of tons of different books and ideas, and like even stuff that I wouldn't have expected on there, ideas about masculinity and love and crushes and stuff. It's sick. So I'm very bullish on Joe Foley, and dude, I'm looking forward to speaking again, man.
Oh, thanks. As am I.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the episode, and if you want more, well, why don't you press right here? Come on. Oddly, our attachment systems lie to us. They lie to us. And this was put to me earlier this year as red flags don't look red if you're wearing rose-colored glasses. And I think that's what the early stages of a relationship are. The early stages of a relationship are rose-colored glasses, and a lot of the time it means that you don't see red flags.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the early stage is a stage of idealization. You project onto the person, you feel so good about yourself in their presence. They make you feel smart, beautiful, irreplaceable, unique, and you kind of get hooked to that feeling. You know, I used to feel so good in your presence. Why now don't I? Why has it changed? Some people partner with someone and all they think to themselves, consciously or not, is please don't ever change. And some people partner with someone and in the back of their mind it is, this is going to change, this is going to change, this is going to change.
Oh, they're in love with that potential.
Yes, that's one way of looking at this. It's like, yes, that's definitely one way. But I think it's an interesting thing. Who, you know, when you actually want this to remain set. And I think that after the idealization, we start to experience with the people that we are with experiences from other relationships, expectations, disappointments, breaches that we experienced elsewhere and that we now bring into this relationship. The way I typically used to say it is that there's only, because people often say, I don't have this issue with anybody else. I don't have this at work. I don't have this with my friends. And I always say, I totally understand it. Because there's only two relationships that mirror each other. The one of your romantic and intimate life now, and the one, and the original one. They echo each other. The one that you had with the people who raised you. And these two have an echo chamber with each other in most unconscious and visceral ways.
It's strange to think about how much of our adult life is puppeted by things that happened before we could even remember it. You know, it's strange with attachment theory, right? Because attachment theory is your attachments.
Is it true? Is it true, Chris? Is the question. We think this way. It's a common model. It's a framework of modern psychology, and it suits us. I mean, you know, it's very much a second nature for me to think this way because I was steeped into this kind of way of thinking about the humankind and human nature and relationships. But sometimes I ask myself, is that what would happen if somebody came in with a completely different theory?
Well,
Do you think that attachment theory might be due for a replication crisis at some point in future?
Yes, someone, there used to be a very prevalent theory when psychoanalysis was really at the core of our psychological culture, and it believed in what, and still does, in the Oedipus complex.
mm-hmm.
Now, who still talks about the Oedipus complex in the general culture? Maybe in an analyst office, but in the general culture, it's kind of passé. The truth of is often the joke of tomorrow.
Mm.
So this is a perfect example of something that was never considered a theory. It was considered true. Every 5-year-old goes through the Oedipus complex. Every 3-year-old. Really?
Wow.
You know.
So the current world of anxious attachment, and this happened before you can
Well,
even speak,
anyway.
and this is ingrained in your nervous system, might be in 20 years' time the Oedipus complex of 2025.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a theory. Let's, and a theory has definitely elements of truth that it tries to describe. It theoretizes over a certain set of observations, but that doesn't mean it's. And there have been other theories like that have been debunked that I really believed in, including that children don't remember anything, but they do, and that So there's a lot of. The attachment is a theory. It's a very powerful and a very useful theory. It's a vocabulary. It's a meaning-making system. It's
Yep.
a theory.
Mm.
Yep.
There's definitely a question around how much is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? How much is it that you've done this assessment, or you've spent some time reflecting and you think that you are a person with dismissive avoidance attachment, or you've got anxious attachment, or you've got what, and then you start to show up in that way in your relationship, and it becomes unfalsifiable because you know it, you can't unknow it.
When I say to people, you really found each other. It's a very interesting way. You found each other, and it allows you to both replicate your core models of relatedness or attachment. And the reason why that's useful is you, in order to once you've replicated it, you can finally change it. It's a beautiful framework. It's useful. I have no idea if it's true. Do you understand? But it's useful. It helps. It makes sense of things. You and I, we're doing with each other, and I do with you, and I interpret you, in ways that have kind of a second nature to me. I've really learned to expect that when people act the way you do, I'm interpreting it ABC. Now that we have replayed my original drama, work on it and hopefully rewrite it and differentiate myself from it, it's great. But I like the notion that it's useful. And I say things in my work to people, and it only is true if they bite. If it's relevant to them, if it resonates with them, then it's true. They say, that's exactly it. Okay, I love it. Means I resonate with you. I understood what's going on here. But is it true? They say, that's true.
What do you make of the man-keeping trend that women are worried about right now?
Another word we needed in the vocabulary. In the
What is
pantheon
it?
of relationship vocabulary. I mean, honestly, I think that as a whole, I tend to stay away from polarizing discourses. I carry the burden. You carry the burden. No, I carry the burden. Have women often been the primary social outlet for men? Yes. Does that have to do with something that men want? Not necessarily. Yesterday, I spoke with a patient who, has a newborn and young kids, and was really kind of feeling like she's not doing it well, neither at the company nor at home. Something very natural that we hear often from moms, but that's because we don't ask that question. Doesn't mean dads don't experience it. And at one point, he wanted to go and visit his friends abroad, and the question was, is there permission and I use the word permission and acceptance, for him to not be home except when it's for work. Is it only okay to not be home when you're working? If you actually are going to see friends, then you may just as well be home with me. And then we talk about how men often don't have friends in the house. And then we talk about how they rely on the Minister of Social Affairs, and it's a she. And when you look at queer couples, this whole dance is very differently. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be gendered. Often it is a role arrangement in which one person is the one who orchestrates the social life, and the other one follows. Sometimes it's because they don't have people, sometimes it's because they're conflict avoidant, and sometimes it's because they're just placating and they want to make it easy, and I'll just go wherever you want to go. So I think I like to look at dynamics. I think I don't necessarily want to create dogmas and man keeping, it's social affairs and it's emotional life, right? Yes, a lot of men find themselves in relationships with women in this context where she is his primary emotional outlet. Now, some of this is because they may live in a context where male vulnerability is not tolerated. Some of this is because we accept much more that men can lose their friends. I mean, when you look at 7-year-old and 6-year-old boys, they're no different. They cry like the girls. They have friends like the girls. It's a male code. It's a cultural indoctrination that leads a lot of men often to give up on their friendships.
Yeah.
They're not valued for having great friendships. They're valued for being competent and accomplished and useful and performative. And so, I think for me it's more interesting to look at cultural systems, look at what is universal, what appears in every culture, even though it comes in a different color, pink, red, and others, than talking about it as something that is men versus women. I think these days we're sliding into real polarizing men versus women.
Yeah.
This one doesn't and TikTok is just like clamoring away about how he's an idiot and she's a bitch, and seriously, I don't want my kids
Boring.
and anybody else's
It's also
kids
boring.
to be part of that kind of a culture. I think that friendship between boys and girls is phenomenal. Friendship in general is phenomenal. Let the boys and girls have a great friendship. You'll learn a ton about what not to do with your girlfriend and boyfriend and whatever else, and them friends. To me, it's about how do we add things, not how do we separate things.
I think it's a great point around the tribalism at the moment. I mean,
Yeah.
people can be tribal about anything, right? There's a great study where they brought a group of 100 people, brought them into a room, and at the front of the room they tossed a coin, and if the coin was heads, you were blue team, and if the coin was tails, you were red team.
Yep.
And everybody behaved according to the color they had. Oh, yes.
So you go over and you speak to the blue team and you say, so what do you think about the red team? And they go, well, I mean, they're not as smart as us, are they? They sort of look a bit stupid. Like, they're obviously not. It's like, you've just seen how arbitrary the selection criteria was. You know that it was a 50-50 complete chance for you to be on this side than that, and immediately people fall into the tribal thing. But I could be...
It's like the prisoner experiment.
Yep.
I mean, it's phenomenal, how you tell me I'm this and I will become that.
Yep.
And I will act accordingly. It's really...
On the cultural coding side, just to ask a question, you're
And
evolutionarily educated.
pieces.
At least as far as I can see, it would have been adaptive, and it seems to be the case that men are able to deal with more transient and looser friendships because there was a higher male disposability ancestrally. We go out for a hunt, and unfortunately, you're Ian now. Ian, you fell down a ravine, and you're gone. So Ian's gone now. I need to be able to move on as a man. If you're alloparenting with your group of female aunties, friends, and grandmas and stuff, that social network would naturally be more tightly tied. So
That's
at
a
least as
good
far as I can
point.
see, I wouldn't lay everything at the feet of culture. I'm aware that this may vary across the world, but
Totally.
I certainly think that men have an uphill battle when it comes to, in adulthood, especially if they're working, especially if they're, trying to provide and do all of the things for the family, and also trying to hold on to male friendships in a manner that maybe just isn't quite so natural to them. 51% of men lack a single confidant for emotional support. And obviously, we have your significant other, the person you spend the most time with, the one you're building this life with. You go to sleep with them every night. You've got this shared family, and you bring these kids up. And I think, to fly the flag for men, I think it's a difficult circle to square, that men are told to sort of open up more and be emotionally vulnerable, but they have a limited bucket of people to be able to do that with, and the one that they can do it with is now feeling the pressure of, well, I have to be his therapist, I have to be his muse, I have to be his diva, I've got to be his housekeeper and his massage, physical therapy, I'm going to be all of these things. And both sides, again, as opposed to going, that's really tough. We can't live on a single wage anymore. And you have to do the double when you get home from work, my darling, because not only have you worked today, but the kids, their packed lunch is making for tomorrow. And I've had a rough day at work as well. And I've got to get home, and I'm feeling some stuff, and I really need to open up to you. And as opposed to that, it's very tight and it's very adversarial. And that's reflected in single world and in the married world. It's reflected in media, and it's reflected in relationships. And I'm on board. I don't like the way that everything is becoming more and more tribal, even within the context of an intimate relationship, or people talking about getting together and trying to be in love.
So you bring up two points for me. First of all, on the evolutionary versus the cultural. I'm multilingual. I speak many languages, and I speak that languages too. I can go back and forth between evolutionary language and cultural language. For me, the beauty is how they interact with each other.
Yep.
Not which one has the supremacy over the other. Is it more cultural? Is it more evolutionary and biological? It's you come in with a certain predisposition that is biological or innate, and then there is a culture that sits on top of it, and
Yep.
This versus that, because this is the thing that stands out. So I totally agree that we are. But the interesting thing about your allusion to the man keeping, or to the man relying primarily on their partner, is that sometimes one of the paradoxes here is that he coming to her, confiding in her, opening himself up to her, letting him, when a man opens up, it's often in my office too, it's not just that he's saying something that he has not said to others. He's often never even said it to himself.
Yes.
It's really beautiful and very moving. And so she, in the beginning, looks at this and thinks, this is wonderful. I am the chosen one with whom he feels that comfortable, that open, that vulnerable. So back to your thing, that the very thing that is originally attractive can become the very source of conflict and disagreement later. This one too,
Yeah.
I liked how you talk to me, and I like how, I feel so chosen by you, by the fact that it's with me that you've decided to domesticate yourself, to open yourself, to finally settle, whatever the whole thing. So it's an interesting thing that, what becomes man keeping later wasn't always experienced as man keeping in the beginning.
Oh my God. Open with me. He's never said this to anybody before.
Of course,
I feel
and that
so
makes
special.
me very special.
Yeah.
Round the picture. I mean, this is the that's why to make it rather than this is a whole different way of looking at it. I do, this notion of male loneliness and the phenomenon that we're talking about at this moment is fairly recent. 19th century America, men had plenty of friends. You go to your islands and all over, men sit after they finished fishing, they're talking to each other, they're schmoozing. They don't need to do personal, expression of their deepest feelings to feel intimate and close. There are multiple languages, and to make this a kind of an innate or a gender division, I think is unfortunate, and it's being exploited big time. It's being exploited by people who really gain from creating divisions, from creating suspicions, from
Who's
kind of
gonna gain?
breaking the deep feeling of complementarity, actually, that exists. Now, you know, the thing that's very interesting for me is that for so many centuries, we saw masculinity as obvious, luminous, simple, doesn't need explanation. What is a man? It's clear. It's not a woman. And you know, women was this kind of mysterious continent that you had to go and elucidate, figure out what's in there, you know. It's what's in there from the psychological point of view and the genital point of view. What's in there? What is this thing called woman? You know. And then you begin to pay attention that, you know, there's an entire apropos vocabulary. Man up, show me your man, you know, be a man. I mean, masculinity is often accompanied with a mandate, with an imperative, with a thing that needs to prove itself constantly. So I began to think that if you always have to prove it, maybe it's not that obvious in the first place.
Oh, that's interesting. That
You know-
nobody, you need to woman up. That
No.
a woman's value is imbued,
She
whereas
has
a
a period.
man's
She knows who she is. She
a
doesn't have
man's
to
is
prove it.
performative. Show me your usefulness.
Yeah, and go to the woods and get some rituals that toughen you up, that transition you from boy to man. I mean, there are very few of those rituals for women because they're biological, apropos evolutionary theory. They're very biological. She doesn't really have to wonder, you know. And of course, a lot of these things switch once you begin to separate gender from anatomy. But until, historically, that was the case. So I began to think masculinity is not nearly that simple, not nearly that obvious, maybe not nearly so easily acquired. Actually, it is hard to acquire and easy to lose.
Yep.
What do you lay the male loneliness that we're seeing at the feet of? What's driving this sort of beyond surface causes of people spending more time online?
I think that male loneliness is not just male. I think that there is women, girls, children. I don't think it's just gendered. I think it's more so for men, for boys. Let's start because it's younger. Because there is less of an acquired socialization that is about if you feel distress, you go and you reach out. The socialization of boys is often if you feel distress, you toughen it up.
Yep.
You keep it in. You do something to get you go do some sport, some activity to get the feeling out of your system. You don't go to find someone to talk about the feelings. That is a very different, you know, I have two boys, a brother, a husband, a father. I've not had women in my intimate circle except for mom. I've kind of spent a tremendous amount of time. That doesn't mean I'm right, but it just means I've looked at this, you know, what did I say when they would be in certain situations, and what would I have said if I had a girl? You know, we know that we touch boys as of the age of 3 much less than we touch our girls. So it's coded in on so many levels. So what makes the boys feel lonely is, yes, I do think it's a whole increase of the contactless world that we're living in. You know, you could say they're not lonely when they're playing games and they're online with other kids who are also playing. I mean, they are interacting. But it is absolutely not the same as going outside and playing with a ball. I think that as a whole, kids are not playing